So what we're going to do today, as Jen said, is we're going to take turns to try to just quickly and hopefully, essentially, describe to you some aspects of what would allow us of a 16-session AEDP therapy. What, would be the characteristics of that, and we ask you to sort of, we do portrayals, but to really imagine yourselves as therapists working to do AEDP within a 16-session limit, because that's our design. So the first thing that, and we're going to talk for about 45-50 minutes, and then we'll have a little chance for a discussion and questions at the end. And we're videotaping this because this is going to be part of how, as we're inviting AEDP therapists to participate in the study, they'll be able to watch this as an initial guide to how to frame your thinking once thinking about this. So the first thing that I want to address is, why are we doing this? And we are launching really a research study that's both an outcome and process research. Because AEDP has been very strong theoretically, and it has been very strong clinically, but it has not had the empirical validation component to allow it to be recognized also in terms of that dimension. So the time has come to do that. So we want to do an outcome research, and we picked the number 16 so that we can do a study that's comparable to studies that have been done to show the effectiveness of CBT and the effectiveness of EFT, Les Greenberg's emotion-focused therapy. There are a number of studies that, of both of those approaches, CBT and EFT, with anxiety and with depression, that have shown the effectiveness of those two models. And now those two models are empirically validated. So that if, as we're modestly but confidently expecting to have really awesome results, if that is in fact the case, then AEDP will be an empirically validated treatment, which is both an honor but really just a huge boost, to therapists and patients and practices and so on and so forth. So we're very interested in having a design where we can compare our findings that we will obtain with findings obtained from these two other well-established therapy models. The other thing that I want to mention is that we will, since we videotape our psychotherapy sessions as a rule, we're going to ask the therapists, the participating therapists in the study, to videotape sessions, so we will also be able to do research in process research into really what are the change mechanisms, and be able to also engage in that in-depth study, which will only be enhanced if we show that this is an empirically validated, effective treatment. Then it makes sense, not just to people from within our community, but from everywhere, to become interested in, well, what are the change mechanisms? So that's really our launching into the project. Now, the second thing that I want to talk to you about, and we have slightly nerdily and in parallel process, we have 16 points. So that's point number one. Point number two, or topic number two, precedents. There are a lot of precedents for short-term or time-limited therapy. that have been written about, that have been researched, that there are books written about, that there are case studies, transcripts, etc. And amongst them are the 12-session therapy model of James Mann, the work of David Mallon, the work of Davalu, and short-term dynamic psychotherapy, which really had some influence historically on the development of AEDP. But in addition to that, so much of CBT work, and particularly in research, is time limited. And also, just to make it really clear, there's a hope that, patients with a complexity and a variety of issues are treated within a time-limited modality. We also buy models that are similar or congruent or resonant with AEDP. We also have Les Greenberg's EFT model and a whole series of studies using 12 to 16 to 20 sessions. A series of studies into doing time-limited emotion-focused therapy with complex trauma patients. So they're really just a whole bunch of precedents, that can inspire confidence that this is a well-traveled road and it's doable. Not to mention the real world of insurances and managed care and national averages, right? Where I think like the average number of sessions, that people get based on insurance data, something like 12, and that might even be high. The median for the number of sessions that people tend to have in our country is 5. Right, so this is really a way of putting it in context. And you have your own experiences with managed care and in California, that the world of time-limited treatment is the world that a lot of people in this country really live in. One last thing about that, we will be providing references to some of these prior approaches in short-term or time-limited therapies. However, we're not making it part of our study. In other words, you're welcome to read it, and it's very, very instructive, and it's a great literature. However, the reason why we're not saying, okay, this is our background, read these references, is that all those studies in all those approaches have fundamentally a pathology-based orientation. And there's another person who's right here in Berkeley, who's Hannah Levinson, right? Hannah Levinson's time-limited psychotherapy and beautiful writings. However, we're not referencing them specifically because, we're not saying go read it and you'll know how to do it, because all of those approaches fundamentally focus on pathology. And that this is an AEDP study, which is going to be healing-oriented and leaning into transformance from the get-go, from the beginning. Point number 3, which is really what our entire seminar today is about, but it's really how to conduct a 16-session AEDP treatment. And this actually will save us some time because it's sort of like a one-sentence point, really, which is how do you conduct a 16-session AEDP treatment the way you conduct any AEDP treatment. Only you do it in 16 sessions. That's it. We can go on. I will say. All right.
Point number 4.
Okay.
So this is where the research and this study really focuses on, or has the background of AEDP in it. Point number 4 is you're not alone. So it's really important to us, for those of you who will be participating as therapists in the research, that you know you're not alone. And in that, we're offering, as part of the research protocol, supervision for free, 2 sessions of free supervision per 16-session treatment. In addition, there'll be an ongoing weekly drop-in supervision group to bring any questions that you have regarding this to the group, to
Online.
supervisors. That will be online. Yes, thank you. And finally, if there's something really kind of interesting, complex, challenging going on, then there'll be additional supervision or consultation free of charge. So all of this is to say that you're not alone. And there's an AEDP feel to the research, and that's one of the ways to notice that.
Point number 5, which is really getting a little more detail about the similarities of doing a 16-session treatment to regular AEDP therapy, and as I said before, fundamental similarities, which means that from the beginning, we're going to want to lean into transformance manifestations. We're going to be on the lookout for transformance manifestations from the beginning. From the beginning, and throughout, we will take the approach that we're treating a person and not a set of symptoms. And then I think the rule of thumb is that this 16-session AEDP treatment is AEDP, only more so. In other words, when in doubt, privilege the positive. When in doubt, meta-process. When in doubt, affirm. When in doubt, make a relational intervention. Again, and that AEDP, as we'll be talking throughout, is so multifaceted that it really just allows a whole set of repertoire of different kinds of approaches depending on who you are as a therapist, who your patient is that you'll be doing this with, and thus the unique dyad that you'll be forming. Right, so among some of the other things that just to summarize here, undoing aloneness, fundamental, from the beginning. The importance of affirmation. In other words, not just empathy, and not just attunement, but affirmation, which is explicit. We're going to be tracking transformational capacity throughout. That we're working bottom up to promote experience. Right? This is not a top-down model. There is an alternation between top-down and bottom-up, but we're always, always, always seeking to really work at a level that's rooted in experience, in sensation, in the body, in authenticity, and not just in ideas. Narrative and reflection are very important. Excuse me. They're very important, but for us they usually come at the end of a wave of experience as we're putting things together. Some of the other things that I want to mention, again, that are just reviews. I've gotten away without coughing till now. So our attachment orientation, And since attachment is something that is a process that we try to entrain from the beginning of the treatment to form security of attachment, which will allow the dyad to really process experience, is also something that will be one of our goals from the very beginning and will inform the different treatments. And the last piece, of course, is metaprocessing, right? The importance of metaprocessing at all phases of the process, not just to process when there has been a big change or the end of a big wave, but really to be able to help the people that we're working with, particularly since we're in this somewhat different framework, to really metaprocess the experience at all phases of the process. However, I think that last, but possibly, given AEDP's multifaceted model, amongst everything else, that if there's one thing that I want to emphasize, thank you. Yes, the cup is so much more beautiful than my bottle. Thank you, Mary. And that takes me to, I want to say two things. The importance of affirming changes, which is something, and celebrating change for the better, which is something that we do as a rule, but I think particularly when we're working in a time-limited fashion, then the importance of affirming, acknowledging, celebrating, and metaprocessing the changes that the person makes, maybe even more assiduously and with even more attention than we would on an ordinary basis. However, I think that what will allow you to imagine yourself in the role of the therapist, ultimately to be able to apply AEDP in whatever the setting is, and here the setting is 16 sessions, has to do with point number 6, which is moment-to-moment tracking. And that moment-to-moment tracking is really what's foundational, that anything that we do, affirmation, transformance detection, working with defenses, promoting emotional experience, processing experience to completion, working relationally, any of these aspects, many, many facets of AEDP, what allows us to do them in an attuned and accurate fashion is that everything is what's foundational to all of these activities is the moment-to-moment tracking that we engage in. So I want to sort of deconstruct what does moment-to-moment tracking, what are we tracking moment-to-moment? And we're tracking moment-to-moment, we're tracking many things. We're tracking transformance. We're tracking emotional experience. Is the patient in touch with their genuine emotions? Are they defended? Are they dysregulated? Are they touching into core affect, etc.? We're tracking relational experiences in the dyad. Are we in tune? Are we coordinated? Is there disruption? Is there repair? Is there coordination? We're tracking defenses, or lack thereof. We're tracking authenticity. We're tracking the involvement of the somatic system. How much is the person really in touch with their somatic experience? Now, I could go on, and you're going to get really overwhelmed, even though I'm saying everything that you know. But the point here is that what's organizing and what's going to allow each of us participating in this study, but it's really a point across the board for any AEDP therapist, was going to allow accurate and effective treatment is that what we're moment to moment tracking is that we're going to notice what works, we're going to notice what doesn't work, and we're going to notice what needs to be addressed for this patient, for this dyad, in this session, in this moment. And in that way, it becomes what's absolutely beautiful about AEDP and why we don't have a manualized treatment, but we use maps and guidelines and moment-to-moment tracking in the states, is that each patient and each dyad is making its own map, right? So we're going to, and here more than when, time is less limited, but across the board always, let's notice what works and heighten that. Notice it, affirm it, celebrate it, do more of it. Notice what doesn't work. Now, and that's when it becomes, notice what doesn't work. Notice what seems to be needed that's missing from the treatment and provided. And that's what allows us, or will allow you to conduct an individualized treatment. I'm going to say one more thing. And just to give you an example, I have started to do my research case. I'm doing my first research case. We've just finished 4 sessions. And, it became very clear this is a woman who has a lot of resources and also has a pretty big trauma history. So pretty early in session 1, I really shared with her my experience of being moved by her and being quite taken by her. So I made a rather bold, given that it was the first session, relational intervention, which was somewhat disorganizing to her, right? So rather than upping the relational ante, it became much more important to do some anxiety regulation, to attune to her and relationally move back a little bit and really work with that. So it's not the across the board, at all costs, make your relational intervention and then meta process. Learn from the dyadic interaction and tracking moment to moment what's working for this patient, and let's do more of that, but also let's notice what's not quite working for this patient at this moment and what's needed. So in that particular case, what was needed was more anxiety regulation and less relational work at that moment. Right? So just as an example. Okay.
Right. So point number 7, moving right along, and now into the ways that this treatment, that a 16-session AEDP treatment differs from a non-time limited AEDP treatment, and especially looking at how it differs in the first half of the treatment, sessions 1 through 8. And really that's just starting to keep in mind the finiteness of the therapy, and with a really soft touch, just starting to get used to saying things like in our 16 sessions together, right? From session 1, saying like, okay, so this is our, in these 16 sessions together, how, what is it that you're wanting, what is it that you're looking for, things like that. And when setting up appointments, maybe consider saying, okay, great, so we'll have our 3rd session next Tuesday. Just to lightly pepper with a light hand the idea, to keep coming back to the idea that there's 16 sessions here, to keep that in mind.
I think that in addition to that, what we haven't mentioned so far, but will be gone over in detail when we go over our protocol for the therapists who will be in the study, is that the treatment is low cost for the patient. So in other words, in exchange for their participation, we're offering a low fee treatment. Okay, so I want point number 8 is to briefly talk about the first session and how the first session begins. First session begins as any first session begins, which is, can you tell me something about what it is that brings you here, what it is that you want help with, and what makes you come here. However, in addition to that, and the mentioning of the time limit, as Jen just said, there are just a couple of things that I want to sort of bring in, and you'll think of others. But I think one of them is, from the beginning, imagining the end, but framing it in a positive way, which is when you imagine yourself at the end of the 16 sessions we have together. If things go well, what do you want to see for yourself? Right? It's imagining the future. You're coming here with this set of problems or difficulties. What do you envision? How would you like things to be if you and I work together well, right? So that you sort of are imagining the future from the beginning. In addition, and again, always with attunement, but in addition, expressing gratitude to the patient from the beginning for agreeing to be in this research project. Now, they are getting something very powerful, which is very low cost or minimal cost, high quality therapy. So they're getting something that's really very valuable. And in fact, the people we've had in our research, excuse me, do feel incredibly grateful to be able to have, such high quality treatment for relatively low fee. At the same time, these patients are making a huge contribution, to us, to AEDP, to other patients, for us to really understand how things work. So expressing that gratitude occasionally throughout, but certainly from the first session, unless there's a reason not to, is something else. Okay?
So point number 9, and points 9 and 10 are really about things to do throughout the treatment. The first being really paying attention to the patient's experience. And Diana has already spoken a little bit to this in point 5, going through all the ways the treatment is still AEDP. But here really wanting to tease out, in addition to their general experience of participating, being in therapy with you and of you, also really wanting to focus on their experience of participating in the research, what it is to be in a time-limited therapy, how it is to be doing this with you. And a lot of the time, patients actually feel pride in contributing to something like this research study. So being on the lookout for that, so that you can pick that up and help meta-process that pride. And then on the other side, point 10 to do throughout is the therapist stance. And really, as we've already said, but just to reiterate, really affirming change. Any changes that you see, affirm those. Changes outside of session, changes that come in session. Just really affirming and sort of blowing on that flame to help it get bigger. And then also, again, throughout, where it's reasonable, where it comes in and is natural, continuing to express gratitude towards the patient. Point 11. So referencing the midpoint, just at the halfway through point, about session 9, if it hasn't already naturally come up, just sort of ask, how are we doing? So we're about halfway through. How is this feeling? Where are you hoping to be by the end? How is it to be here where we are now? And really meta-processing the midpoint.
Point number 12 is a little bit more on the midpoint crossing into the second half of the therapy. And here I think it's two things. One is that you will be in the thick of the work. By now, the relationship has probably been formed. There's safety and security. There's deepening of the work, and really the work on the core issues and the fundamental issues that are bringing the person to seek therapy and that have emerged in the course of doing it, probably very much engaged in those issues. And as we know, in AEDP sessions, there are those small moments of triumph throughout. But there's something about just being aware of how is this midpoint being registered by the person that you're working with? Is it naturally coming up? Is there a sense that the reality of time is being minded by both members of the dyad? Or is there a kind of blissful sense that's sort of delicious, but is there some denial that this is really coming to an end? This is the moment. I think for the first 8 sessions, you don't have to focus super much on that beyond what Jen was saying, that from the beginning, we want to say this is session 1 of 16 and so on and so forth. But around the midpoint, just your awareness of that, how that is getting processed or not by the person you're working with, and then proceeding to sort of start to the light touch, bring it into the work becomes very important. So we're starting to now head towards the last phases of the treatment, which brings me to point number 13, which is the T word, termination. So in true AEDP fashion, we actually want to ask for your help here to generate possibly a different language, because if you think of it, what an unpleasant word. How could you possibly feel good about termination? It really sounds, the more you think about it, the more awful it becomes. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes, right? But there are other metaphors. There are other metaphors of bringing, one that comes to mind is graduation, another is leaving home, right? But I just take a moment, and I just want to invite some ideas about an alternative terminology. If we don't call the end of the treatment termination. Any thoughts? Yes, Monica.
Completion.
Completion.
In the same way we talk about the way.
I love completion. I love completion. Trish.
Continuing in the world.
Continuing in the world, right? The transition into the world. Yeah.
Launching.
Launching. This is awesome. Yes.
Integration.
Launching, integration, completion. Any others? I think these are awesome.
Manifestation.
Manifestation, that's a little to California.
Transition.
I'm teasing.
Transition.
Transition, that's similar to continuing into the world, right? Thank you. I mean, this is just the beginning, but I just want to invite you to think of that. But I think this idea of completion or transition or integration or continuing into the world is very, very much in the spirit of what we're wanting to get across. So thank you with that. Point number 14. Dealing with loss. Right? That we're now sort of talking about coming towards the end of the therapy, coming to the end of what we hope will have been a powerful experience, and in anticipation its completion, or the transition from therapy into translating one's changes into one's life. The experience of loss is probably going to be a central experience. And I want to just talk briefly about how we deal with loss in AEDP in this context. However, what I want to preface my remarks with is to say that it's not that a feeling of loss is not inevitable. Like with everything else in AEDP, not everybody who is going to come to complete their 16 sessions is going to experience mourning or loss. Some people will and some people won't. And so that not to ever assume the way we never assume anything about, assume or presume about another's experience. Loss is clearly going to come up in this context for many people. But for those for whom it doesn't, just to allow the possibility that it is primarily a feeling of gratitude or celebration or eagerness or something else, and that this is not a defense against the inevitability of the feeling of loss. Huge AEDP point. Huge. Having said that, let me say a couple of things about working with loss in AEDP. And that I think here, you know, some of our basic concepts like undoing aloneness and dyadic regulation really come in. And let me say, you know, very specifically how to translate this, which is that as somebody's starting to grieve, you know, the loss of this relationship, or it's bringing up loss in earlier relationships, to really say something like, I'm so glad that this is coming up now, that we can do it together. Right? To again, affirm it, express appreciation for it's happening, and that it's we're going to do it together. Like, you and I are going to deal with the loss that we were going to have, or the feeling of loss that's coming up. We're going to deal with this together, and I'm so glad that we have a chance to do so. I think the other is to really affirm and acknowledge the patient's capacity to feel and the courage that it takes to allow themselves to have a painful experience. Right? Again, to sort of frame it in appreciation while working with it. And again, if appropriate and if right for the patient, to really be taken or celebratory. I don't know if celebratory is the right word, but wow, you're really letting yourself feel it. You know, this is such a powerful thing. You might have not been able to do this earlier. And look how much has happened, or look how much trust there is here. That even with completion, 3 weeks ahead, you're allowing yourself to have such a powerful experience. Right? But again, the framing of the loss and the working with it very much in the context of the relationship. It's about affirming.
Which brings us to point 15, sessions 12 to 16. And I guess I'll call this celebration, launching, all these wonderful terms you came up with, moving out into the world, manifestation if you're in California.
We get it in New York 10 years later. So,
so from the AEDP perspective, really looking for those moments that you can celebrate achievement with the patient, where you can really ask them in the right moments as they're experiencing change, right? How can you take this out into the world? How can you take us out into the world with you? Really taking those last 4 sessions to really, as Sue Ann Padiero would say, like glue the glimmer, to really stay with the change and see how they can think to bring you and this work with them. And then through this also, this is another time where your gratitude as therapist would, could come in again as so naturally towards the end of the work. Right? Like, wow, we've done this together, and thank you for doing this. It's so moving. Yeah, and this is a place really in AEDP to like really lean into AEDP, right? To really lean into privileging the positive, privileging the relationship, affirming, just really in that goodbye, leaning into what we know as AEDP therapists.
so now we've come to our last point. And in essence, our last point number 16, is trust your instincts. Trust your instincts, trust your patient, trust yourself, and most of all, trust the process. It occurred to me, Jen and I and some of the people in the room here just participated in, and Miriam was here, in a weekend of core training. And it was so powerful to notice how in supervision after supervision, right, with a completely arbitrary time limit, 50 minutes, right? It could have been 40 or 45 or an hour and a half or half an hour. It's a purely arbitrary time limit. In each and every one of them, without exception, something powerful and important happened. Some were easy, some were difficult, some went smoothly, some were more complex. But in each and every one, without fail, something important and meaningful happened within the time frame. And that's really and part of it, so has to do with what we share, which is really a trust in the process. A trust in the process, a trust in the community that supports us, a trust in the model, and really some trust in the unconscious of the person that we're working with to give coherence and meaning and structure to this experience that we're co-creating. And there's so many things, I was thinking, in our world that are time limited. The college semester, the 5-day week, like endless number of things where, when we're given a time limit, be it little or be it big, we adjust and we fit ourselves in and we make it work. So I think that's really what we want to say to you in closing, that this is really about trusting yourselves and trusting the people we have the honor of working with, trusting the AEDP model, which in a community here is really what we share, and fundamentally, really trusting the transformational process. that we're really seeking to entrain and work with and track and follow. So we have finished our 16 points within pretty much the time that we had said that we would. And we have about a little less than 10 minutes that we want to really open it up to you, and we want to sort of like invite your reactions and questions if you have them.
I feel contained by the limitation of the 16 sessions and where to expect, and also by the support of the structure that the two of you and the other people involved creating the structure of it. Because I spent a lot of time and thought put into that whole that.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm really excited, like totally. I'm just so happy that you're doing it, because I'm just constantly having to explain or justify AEDP, and usually against something else that I don't really want to say it's against. And this is just, you know, I'm just really happy. And as far as the 16 sessions, you know, I work in an adolescent psychiatric hospital. The length of stay is about a week. It's an AEDP informed unit, and so to me, it just feels, I guess I feel kind of less alone, being able to go, you know, we might only have a day or two with this person, and there's so much we can do in a day or two. And people treat me like I'm crazy, only I know I'm not, most of the time. So I think I just feel excited about embracing the 16 sessions.
Yes, sir.
I also got excited. I'm excited about the research and what that will give to AEDP and to the wider world understanding of AEDP. I also feel excited about the 16 sessions because I think a lot about ways that I would love AEDP to be more accessible to a wider economic community, and I think learning to apply it to less sessions will have that potential. So I feel excited for that reason.
Thank you. I mean, I think I very much appreciate that as well. I think that's sort of part and parcel of sort of the realities of the world that we live in. So gaining this experience and being able to translate it very specifically to making it more available, and that, you know, the framework is very important. Yeah. Larissa?
I will admit to having a little bit of anxiety about my own sense of loss and around the completion, but I'm actually excited about having something scientific that, you know, I know subjectively it works, I know I feel this works, but to have something that shows this works. And I like the format of asking what the hopes for treatment are, so that, and then measuring halfway through where we are, and having that be a way to gauge whether it really is working based on communications, participation, and goal setting and everything. That's great.
I really appreciate the intentionality of just saying it from the get-go, that this is what we're doing. And I can imagine being a client and feeling compelled by that, to know, okay, I have a goal of what I'm doing here, and this is what we're doing. And also linking it back to the accelerated part. That's what accelerated is.
Right, right. not to put too fine a point on it. Right? That this is the roots of how the AEDP came to be. So thank you for that. Yes.
Yes.
I'm very excited by this, very inspired. I tend to grow very long-term with people. I've been in a situation where someone comes to me in 12 sessions, and I was doing ADP light work and set a goal at the beginning. That's pretty amazing what can come up in a short amount of time. And it's nice to have a formal protocol that I can refer to, but a map, a roadmap that I can refer to as opposed to try to adjust it to 12 sessions.
Yes, Mary.
Imagining myself in the client's place, I'm feeling like I did as a student, beginning a class that I was very excited about, and imagining that sense of how I'll feel at the end of the class. And as I do that, then of course there's a test. So I have this fantasy, perhaps like a session 13 or 12 or something, or like a 2 or 3 week pause. And then coming back, well, how was it? What did you encounter or something? I just kind of thought that might be exciting, how the test period of integration.
Right, and I mean, in fact, the semester is about 16 weeks long. Right, the beginning, middle, and an end. Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Anybody else want to pass comment? Yes, Pauline.
I'm also excited, and I have in mind a client I was working with who had kinds of insurance, and we had to keep to a really set number of sessions. And she was my last insurance client because I decided to give up. So I was particularly keen on the countdown and used the countdown to really hold our work, and it was really effective. I'm remembering her leaving just full, so happy and empowered and some mastery of her life. And this was with this set number of sessions.
Right.
But it also occurred to me as Miriam was speaking that sometimes there is that gap because people go away, and so the 16 sessions, sometimes they may not be every week, and that's going to be a little. I'm wondering how that's going to affect the research. But
again, I want to leave those sort of specific things for when we really discuss the protocol. But I think we have a 16-session treatment. We don't have a 16-week treatment. Right? So I think that in terms of some of the things that have come up, that's really just very important because it's structured yet it allows flexibility. Yeah. So just bring it to completion.
It's just been so wonderful to spend this time with you. Thank you for being here. It's been fun. I felt excitement coming in, but I feel the excitement in the room now too. And I'm really looking forward to continuing and having another meeting probably on the web in the fall to discuss the research protocol and more of the research detail at that point. And for now, just deep appreciation for you all being here tonight.
Thank you so much, and thank you for contributing to really something that will allow therapists that come into our study to be able to really take a look at this webinar, but with your energy and, just sort of contributing to the conversation. So, thank you.